to deliver their testimony. Again, we thank you for being here, and Senator from Iowa is recognized for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan and Ranking Member Plaskett, for this opportunity to appear. I thank you for inviting me to come here. And what I'm about to tell you sounds like it's out of some fiction spy thriller, but it actually happened, and it happened in our own government. Congressional oversight is a constitutional demand. We dedicate our careers to it. I have, at least. And during the course of my service, I've ran countless investigations. In the past few years, I've never seen so much effort from the FBI, the partisan media, and some of my Democrat colleagues to interfere with and undermine very legitimate congressional inquiries. It's because of a triad of disinformation and outright falsehoods. As one example, look at Crossfire Hurricane. Bit by bit, piece by piece, it's been deconstructed and shown to be politically motivated investigation, which it was. We all know now that it was the Democratic National Committee, along with the Clinton campaign, who colluded with the Russians. They used a former Russian spy, Fusion GPS, and law firm to create a fake dossier and then tried to cover it up. Now, the most recent example of this triad at work are efforts against my and Senator Johnson's ongoing Biden family investigation. That investigation started on August 14th, 2019, when I was chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, with a letter that I wrote to the Treasury Department. My letter was about a questionable financial transaction subject to the Committee on Foreign Investment that related to a matter involving the Biden family. As our investigation continued and advanced, Democratic leadership and partisan media began their attack on our investigation. This is where that spy thriller starts to heat up. On July 13th, 2020, then Minority Leader Schumer, Senator Warner, then Speaker Pelosi, and then Chairman Schiff sent a letter with a classified attachment to the FBI. That letter expressed a purported belief that Congress was the subject of a foreign disinformation campaign. The letter was targeted at the Johnson-Grassley investigation. However, the classified attachment included unclassified element that attempted and failed to tie our work to a Russian agent named Andrei Derkach. Unsurprisingly, those unclassified elements were leaked to the press to support a false campaign accusing Senator Johnson of me of relying on material from a Russian agent and thus advancing Russian disinformation. Of course, it was pure nonsense that the irresponsible media portrayed this all as the truth. Guess what then? Chairman Schiff claimed without any evidence whatsoever that our oversight work was rooted in Russian disinformation. Of course, you know, he conveniently left out that our oversight work was actually rooted in official U.S. government and Obama administration records. Then, guess what? Senator Blumenthal also wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post accusing our investigation of, quote, perpetuating Russian disinformation in the U.S. Senate, end of quote. And then, guess what? Minority Leader Schumer and then Ranking Member Wyden tried to offer a resolution in the Senate disparaging our Biden investigation. They, in a sense, were basically calling us Russian stooges. Pretty simple. That violated Senate rules in their efforts and of course were appropriately shut down. On July the 16th, 2020, mere days after the July 13th letter, then ranking members Wyden and Peters wrote a letter to me and Senator Johnson asking for a briefing from the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force. Our staff and the ranking member's staff had already, now remember, we had already received a briefing March of 2020 that put the issue to rest. So why another briefing? The point being, there was no real purpose for another briefing, let alone a member-level briefing, other than to further undermine our investigation. Some of our Democratic colleagues weren't interested in anything but using the briefing to try and destroy our investigation. But at these Democrats' insistence, the FBI caved. In August 2020, Senator Johnson and I had that infamous briefing from the FBI that was needless. And then, as we had feared, the contents of that briefing were later leaked to the Washington Post, even though the FBI had promised us confidentiality. That leak outrageously and inaccurately connected that FBI briefing to our investigation in another effort to falsely label our good government oversight work as Russian disinformation. Now, the Wall Street Journal editorial board was on top of it because that board did the right thing and wrote a piece about the briefing titled, quote, "The FBI's dubious briefing. Did the Bureau set up two GOP senators at the behest of Democrats?" End of quote. So, simply put, the briefing was unnecessary and completely irrelevant to the substance of our investigation. It was only done because the Democrats wanted to do so. They could try and smear us, and the FBI wrongly did their bidding. To this very day, Director Wray refuses to provide Senator Johnson and me, as constitutional officers, records relating to that briefing, including the alleged intelligence basis for it. Director Wray has consistently failed to perform duties required of his position. Now, another example of this Democratic disinformation campaign involved a George Kent, former State Department Deputy Assistant General. Senator Johnson and I ran a transcribed interview with George Kent. Before the interview, Democrats acquired material from that Russian agent, the same one that I mentioned earlier. At the interview, Democrats, not Republicans, Democrats asked Mr. Kent about the same material. Mr. Kent said it was disinformation. Now think about that. After all the spears the Democrats were throwing at the two of us, in the end, it was the Democrats who introduced Russian disinformation from a Russian agent into the investigative record as an exhibit. A foreign agent whom our own intelligence committee warned was actively seeking to influence U.S. politics. Not me or Senator Johnson, not our staff. It was the Democrats who inserted disinformation from the Russians into our official record. The partisan media and Democrat leadership ought to be ashamed of themselves for fake information if they spread about our investigation. So in the end, they all failed to stop Senator Johnson and me. On August 23rd, 2020, Senator Johnson and I released our first Biden investigation report. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk in this town about Treasury records, and you ought to pursue them. In that 2020 report, we made public the contents of many Treasury records. But we didn't stop there. We issued another report, November 18th, 2020. Our report exposed extensive financial relationships between Hunter and James Biden and Chinese nationals connected to the communist regime. More precisely, Chinese nationals connected to the Chinese government, military, and intelligence services. With the new Congress, of course, Senator Johnson and I transitioned to be ranking members. We hadn't forgot about what the triad of partisan media, FBI, and Democrats, and leadership did to us. So we don't stop. We did what any congressional investigator worth their salt would do. We gathered even more records to prove them all wrong. We acquired authentic bank records that substantiated findings of our previous two reports. They financially linked Hunter Biden and James Biden to entities and individuals connected with the communist Chinese regime. We also acquired business records with Hunter and James Biden's signatures alongside those same Chinese nationals. How were they supposed to be paid? According to bank records, there were wires from companies linked to the communist regime. In 3-floor speeches, we made those bank records public and asked this question to our partisan detractors, the same ones that I mentioned throughout my remarks, and maybe a lot of others. Are these official bank records Russian disinformation? We also shared hundreds of pages of bank records with U.S. Attorney Weiss. He failed to respond. Now, as our investigation continued, whistleblowers approached my office with allegations that the FBI created an assessment in August 2020, the same month that the FBI briefed me and Senator Johnson. According to these whistleblowers, that assessment was used by FBI headquarters to improperly discredit negative Hunter Biden information as, you might expect, disinformation. As a result, this scheme allegedly caused investigative activity to entirely cease. It's been further alleged to me that in September 2020, the same month Senator Johnson and I released our first report, those FBI headquarters personnel began placing their analysis of the credibility of reporting related to the Biden family in what I've been told is a restricted access sub-file. Further allegations to my office involved FBI personnel at the Washington field office who improperly ordered information to be closed by the FBI related to Hunter Biden's potential criminal conduct in October 2020, just before the election, even though it was verified or it was verifiable. Other whistleblower disclosures to my office make clear that the FBI has within its possession very significant, impactful, and voluminous evidence with respect to potential criminal conduct by Hunter and James Biden. These disclosures also allege that Joe Biden was aware of Hunter Biden's business arrangements and may have been involved in some of them. We still aren't sure what's been done with this information. The FBI's track record doesn't create much faith that the information is going to be followed up on. It's clear to me that the Justice Department and the FBI are suffering from a political infection that, if it's not defeated, will cause the American people no longer to trust these storied institutions. It will also threaten the American way of life. Unfortunately, what you've heard from me, this story of government abuse and political treachery, is scarier than fiction. It really happened. But, Mr. Chairman, your committee here, so assembled, has an opportunity to help us write the last chapter in this real-life drama. You must relentlessly pursue the facts and the evidence. Senator Johnson and I, on August 23rd, 2020, Senator Johnson and I released our first Biden investigation report. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk in this town about Treasury records, and you ought to pursue them. In that 2020 report, we made public the contents of many Treasury records. But we didn't stop there. We issued another report, November 18th, 2020. Our report exposed extensive financial relationships between Hunter and James Biden and Chinese nationals connected to the communist regime. More precisely, Chinese nationals connected to the Chinese government, military, and intelligence services. With the new Congress, of course, Senator Johnson and I transitioned to be ranking members. We hadn't forgot about what the triad of partisan media, FBI, and Democrats, and leadership did to us. So we don't stop. We did what any congressional investigator worth their salt would do. We gathered even more records to prove them all wrong. We acquired authentic bank records that substantiated findings of our previous two reports. They financially linked Hunter Biden and James Biden to entities and individuals connected with the communist Chinese regime. We also acquired business records with Hunter and James Biden's signatures alongside those same Chinese nationals. How were they supposed to be paid? According to bank records, there were wires from companies linked to the communist regime. In 3-floor speeches, we made those bank records public and asked this question to our partisan detractors, the same ones that I mentioned throughout my remarks, and maybe a lot of others. Are these official bank records Russian disinformation? We also shared hundreds of pages of bank records with U.S. Attorney Weiss. He failed to respond. Now, as our investigation continued, whistleblowers approached my office with allegations that the FBI created an assessment in August 2020, the same month that the FBI briefed me and Senator Johnson. According to these whistleblowers, that assessment was used by FBI headquarters to improperly discredit negative Hunter Biden information as, you might expect, disinformation. As a result, this scheme allegedly caused investigative activity to entirely cease. It's been further alleged to me that in September 2020, the same month Senator Johnson and I released our first report, those FBI headquarters personnel began placing their analysis of the credibility of reporting related to the Biden family in what I've been told is a restricted access sub-file. Further allegations to my office involved FBI personnel at the Washington field office who improperly ordered information to be closed by the FBI related to Hunter Biden's potential criminal conduct in October 2020, just before the election, even though it was verified or it was verifiable. Other whistleblower disclosures to my office make clear that the FBI has within its possession very significant, impactful, and voluminous evidence with respect to potential criminal conduct by Hunter and James Biden. These disclosures also allege that Joe Biden was aware of Hunter Biden's business arrangements and may have been involved in some of them. We still aren't sure what's been done with this information. The FBI's track record doesn't create much faith that the information is going to be followed up on. It's clear to me that the Justice Department and the FBI are suffering from a political infection that, if it's not defeated, will cause the American people no longer to trust these storied institutions. It will also threaten the American way of life. Last week's hearing on climate change and public health was another missed opportunity to discuss our nation's ailing fiscal health. That same day, House Republicans passed legislation to rein in excessive government spending, lift the debt ceiling, and impose meaningful fiscal controls. Meanwhile, Senate Democrats haven't lifted a single finger. Now, instead of working together to write a responsible budget, we're here discussing an alleged scheme involving fossil fuel overlords. Rather than attacking important American businesses that employ tens of thousands of Americans, we should work together to reduce an unsustainable national debt. Reaching a consensus will require us to respectfully listen to opinions of experts whose views may differ from our own. No one learns anything sitting in an echo chamber. This is one reason why I've invited witnesses with a variety of views during this series of climate change hearings. Sometimes I've discussed with a witness that I invited on this or that subject, but sometimes I've disagreed with witnesses I've invited on this or that, but I value their opinions. Today is no different with Ms. Fischer-Roth, and I don't see eye to eye on all energy matters, particularly when it comes to renewable fuels and wind. However, we do agree oil and gas are critical to lowering energy costs, protecting our national security, and reducing CO2 emissions. We also agree that President Biden's war on fossil fuels has been disastrous for the economy and terrible for consumers. I believe in all of the above energy strategies: oil, gas, biofuel, wind. We need them, all for national security and for economic success. President Biden, on the other hand, believes in all of the history of his preferred and none of the rest strategy. It's kind of simple. In this town, people say they're all of the above. Well, half of them are for none of the above, but everything below. And the other half are for everything above above, but nothing below the ground. This sort of one-size-fits-all to solving this problem just doesn't make sense. I've been saying for 30 years, long time before climate change was much of a debate, that we had 4 goals that we had to have for energy policy. 1, fossil fuels. Number 2, all the alternative energy you can think of. And number 3, conservation, both government imposed and personally imposed. And 4, nuclear. It seems to me that that's still a policy we're going to have for the next 25 years, except for the unrealistic views that we can get everything by wind tomorrow. Poor policy decisions have consequences, and as a result, we've seen energy prices rise substantially across the board. This is why the 2 leading topics of concern that I've heard from Iowans during the Biden administration have been inflation and the price of gasoline. The president can deflect blame all he wants, but the rise in the price of gasoline has been a direct consequence of his administration's energy policies. Candidate Biden vowed to end fossil fuels during his campaign. On his first day in office, he decided to shut down the Keystone Pipeline, stifling our ongoing energy independence and killing thousands of jobs. Also on January 2021, he issued an executive order pausing new oil and gas leases on public lands and federal waters. And now he complains because Saudi is cutting down on the pumping of oil by $1 million a day and the price going up. And we've reduced the national strategic reserve to the lowest level in 40 years. It just doesn't make sense that we would stop jobs in this country to increase more jobs in Saudi Arabia and import the oil here, and probably dirtier oil than we'd produce in this country. A barrage of his destructive environmental regulations followed, which continued to prevent the construction of much-needed fossil fuel infrastructure. Last month, President Biden issued his first veto to uphold his 401k investment rule. The rule will even hurt everyday Americans' investment, just to further liberal environmental, social, corporate governance, or ESG as you know it. Whereas the federal law requires, under ERISA, that the fiduciary has a responsibility to make sure that you get the most return on your money. That's what the law says. And this administration, through ESG, is violating that law. And just a few weeks later, President Biden's EPA announced his plan to mandate 2/3 of all new vehicles by electric by 2032. These are the same EVs most Americans can't afford, the same EVs that they say in California last year don't plug in during the heavy use of utilities because you may not get the electricity to charge your EV. But Democrats want to continue subsidizing these as part of their misnamed Inflation Reduction Act, which by now the CBO has proven to us not going to reduce inflation, but actually enhance inflation. And that's that green energy program that's within that bill that has a price tag that seems to be ballooning way above what CBO said it was going to be. And to prove that, we have the Joint Committee on Taxation telling us its tax subsidies will cost $300 billion more than originally advertised, and its cost could rise further once we see updated scores of EV subsidies. The average price of an electric vehicle, according to Kelley Blue Book, is $65,000, roughly the equivalent of Iowa's median household income. But even if half of the Americans could afford an EV, which they can't, an even bigger problem exists. We have neither the load capacity nor the materials to achieve President Biden's energy overhaul. Large swaths of the U.S. electric grid are at risk for shortfalls this summer. Grid reliability is a significant concern already, let alone the concerns over the grid handling load of the President Biden's electric vehicle fantasy. Moreover, we all know that the Communist Party of China has a monopoly on critical mineral mining and refining required to build EV batteries. They're forcing Uyghurs into slavery to bolster their supply chains. That's all being supported by this administration. Meanwhile, environmentalists won't allow us to permit mining projects here in the United States. And think of the inconsistency between the human rights policies of this administration, which I have no disagreement with, but letting the Uyghurs with forced labor to produce some of the stuff that we're going to use in our electric vehicle cars. Or look at what I think it's cobalt or something else that we get from the Congo Republic, that child labor is being used to produce. And this administration and the Republicans in this Congress are against using child labor for anything as far as that's concerned. So not only is this administration pushing policies that drive up the price of gasoline, but their policies would make us even more dependent on a supply chain that runs directly through China. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Let me just take a moment and salute you for your long-term leadership.
In the past several years, I have come to this Senate chamber to discuss my constitutional oversight of the Justice Department and the FBI. In many of those floor speeches, I've discussed legally protected and unclassified whistleblower disclosures that were made to my office relating to the Hunter Biden criminal investigation. These disclosures were made public in the interest of transparency and accountability. because the public's business should be public, and we should know, as senators or congressmen and congresswomen, whether the executive branch of government is faithfully executing the laws as the Constitution requires. Those disclosures that I've made have a very common theme. The Justice Department and FBI have allowed political infection to take root within each agency's decision-making process. Such an infection is an existential threat to any government agency, but to a law enforcement agency that can interfere with our constitutional rights, such an infection is catastrophic. After Crossfire Hurricane, which was the definition of a political investigation, the whistleblower disclosures demanded congressional attention more than ever. So, I wrote public letters asking questions. I directly asked the same to the Attorney General and the FBI Director at committee hearings. I've asked them about allegations that politics infected the Hunter Biden investigation. This sort of political bias erodes trust in government and prevents the equal application of the law as required by the Constitution. I've also asked them about allegations that the FBI used false claims of Russian disinformation to bury potential criminal investigations about Hunter and James Biden. Also, I asked them about allegations regarding specific records within the department's possession relating to potential criminal conduct by the Bidens. I've asked about allegations regarding specific records that show Joe Biden may have been involved in Hunter Biden's business arrangements. The allegations my office has received are very precise, very direct, and very consistent. Accordingly, they're highly credible. These credible allegations raise important and fundamental questions, like these questions. Did the FBI follow normal investigative procedures to vet these claims? Did the FBI follow the facts wherever they led? Or did they improperly shut down credible leads in advance of the 2020 elections? Remember, I've been raising these questions for a long period of time. I've done it through many venues, letters, in hearings, in private calls with agency leadership, and like today, right here on the floor of the United States Senate. The Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation had plenty of opportunities to respond to all these questions I've raised. Not once, so let me emphasize, not once has the Justice Department ever substantially disputed the whistleblower's allegations that I have made public. I've given the Attorney General Garland and Director Wray every opportunity to put our worst fears to rest and assure the American people, as they should, that everything has been done by the book. Both agencies have failed to do so. Just think how simple it is to say that everything was done right way, if they could say that. And that ought to tell you something. Even with their credibility online, the FBI and Justice Department has refused to cooperate when asked for basic information. So as you know, if you've been following all this stuff, and I don't expect people to have time to do that, but yesterday, House Chairman Comer and I issued a letter accompanied by a subpoena from the House committee demanding one FBI document based on protected and highly credible whistleblower disclosures. The unclassified document exists, and it's allegedly referencing a criminal scheme involving then Vice President Biden. Notably, it's a crime to provide false information to Congress during a congressional investigation. Most important, this very document was generated by the FBI themselves. It's time for the Justice Department and FBI to come clean to the American people. What did the Justice Department and FBI do to investigate the information in the document at issue? The answer goes to the heart of whether taxpayer-funded government agencies proceed normally or whether that agency cuts corners. Simply put, did the Justice Department and the FBI treat this information like they would if we, the people, were implicated, or did they sweep it under the rug to protect then-candidate Biden and President Biden now? If the Justice Department and FBI have any hope of redeeming their once trusted position, and that is what the American people have long held, to trust the FBI, Attorney General Garland and Director Wray must answer. Their credibility is on the line. I yield and suggest the absence of a quorum. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I know why we have such a big turnout, because you're getting ready for the 18 months between now and the next election to get a new Senate and to get a new President of the United States. And I thank you, Joni, for bringing all these people together so we can work together to accomplish that. And I want to tell you that I very much appreciate working with Joni. She's an outstanding senator, and what you might not know about her, she's elected to the leadership of our Republican caucus. She presides over the Tuesday caucus we have. She's got a seat with about 6 or 7 other people at the leadership meetings that we have as well. And so we hear a lot from her, but where her respected voice is from her position on the Armed Services Committee, she represents our military very well in giving that opinions that's so well respected. Well, we're all here because we know that the country needs some change. We have a president that's not running the government. People behind him are running the government. You'd almost think that Senator Sanders got elected President of the United States. Anyway, let me assure you that there's plenty of reasons to be thinking about the next election: crime, open borders, fiscal irresponsibility, and all those things. That's why America needs you and me and everybody else to work to make those changes so we can have those solutions to the problems. But I'd like to visit with you about something that doesn't get talked about enough, and that's the deep state, the deep administrative state. So if some of you aren't acquainted with that, that means that the bureaucracy is going to try to do everything, even if they can avoid following the law, to get the job done. And that is not the way democracy and representative government is supposed to work. Now, you'd think that's all the faults of the presidents over the last few years. No, that's the fault of Congress delegating too much authority to the executive branch of government. Or, once you delegate it, not following up to make sure that the law is followed. So I try to make it a practice of doing that. I call it oversight. You can call it checks and balances that you learned in your high school government class, whatever you wanted to. But I'm committed to making sure, as best one senator can, to make sure that everything that's wrong in the bureaucracy is held up. Yeah, I try to keep the FBI accountable. And we all know that the FBI is plagued by political bias. You see it almost daily. Most recently, I've seen it when I've been trying to get an unclassified document. I want to emphasize unclassified document, a federal investigative report about President Biden that is unclassified, and we can't get it. And hopefully, with the help of the House of Representatives and Congressman Cromer, we're going to get that one way or another, including listen, every one of us ought to have confidence in the FBI solving crimes, not interfering in elections and interfering in investigations. And you see it more than what Chuck Grassley says. You see it in the Durham report that was out 2 weeks ago. You see it in what's becoming evident now, the abuse of what we call the FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, being used to follow and compromise the constitutional privacy of individuals just to get inside the Trump campaign and see what you can do to stop him from being elected president in 2016-17. And the whole process went on to stand in the way of his being, ought to be able to do what he can. In other words, they went to office the first day he was elected to the point that we're going to do everything that we can to stop the presidency of the Trump administration, 2017 to 2001. And I want you to know that I'm not going to give up until I get these documents we need, or until we get the FBI to do what they ought to do, solving crime and leaving political bias out of their investigations. You deserve transparency, because the public's business ought to be public. And transparency brings accountability. Just think, I get a lot of my investigations through whistleblowers. And you saw a whistleblower on television, not one that came to me directly, his lawyers have come to me, but through the House of Representatives, you found out how the Justice Department interfered in the Hunter Biden tax investigations. And that's wrong, and we're told that by the Attorney General that he never does that, and you heard it from the whistleblower himself. He was taken off of that investigation. And that's what it takes. Holding the Biden responsibility feet to the fire is my responsibility, and it ought to be the responsibility of 534 others members of Congress. We don't have enough of doing our job of following up to make sure that a president that takes an oath to faithfully execute the law is actually doing that. And this president is not doing that. We need your help to turn this country around. Stay as active as you are right now. Stay informed. We're going to take back the White House and the Senate in 2024, turn this country around. We can't do it without your help. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving Barbara and me the opportunity to serve you in the United States Senate.
Stay right here. Stay right here. We'll get a photo. Okay. Thank you, Chuck Grassley. And now I'd like to welcome to the stage our entire Iowa delegation. We have with us Ashley Hinson, Marionette Miller-Meeks, Zach Nunn, and Randy Feenstra.
Senator from Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I'm here to discuss my constitutional oversight of the Justice Department and the FBI. It surely has been a very busy year thus far for congressional oversight, and let me say, rightly so. That's the way it should be. Because we know first Congress passes laws, but Congress can't stop there. We got to make sure that Congress follows up to guarantee, under our checks and balances of our Constitution, that a president will faithfully execute the laws. In many of my speeches on the topic of oversight, I've discussed how political infection has taken root in the Biden Justice Department and FBI. Such a political infection is catastrophic to the trust the American people must have in these institutions in order for our people to have, for those institutions to have any legitimate effect. To restore this country's confidence in the Justice Department and the FBI, these agencies must come clean with the 1023 document that whistleblowers have approached me about. An FBI 1023 document is used to collect information from what the FBI calls a confidential human source. A confidential human source is not, I want to emphasize, is not a mere walk-in or a mere tip like journalists have reported. Confidential human source purpose is to advance investigative activity, and the FBI takes great care to make sure that they can vet these people and know that they serve a useful purpose. The 1023 that I sought from the FBI references a criminal scheme involving then Vice President Biden and his alleged receipt of $5 million for a policy decision. Now, at first, the FBI refused to even admit that this document existed, let alone admit that this document was marked unclassified. Then I told Director Wray last week that Chairman Comer and I've reviewed the 1023. I told Director Wray that this 1023 is marked unclassified. I told him that it was dated June 30th, 2020, and I and Chairman Comer demanded that he produce that document. Director Wray made one excuse after another to not produce it. I reminded Director Wray about how the FBI has a penchant for leaking classified information to the media and producing documents to the media. In fact, we all know that the FBI did exactly that. In May 18, 2023, New York Times article, the FBI, therefore, has no legitimate basis to refuse production of a non-classified document to the Congress of the United States. Let's keep in mind that Congress has received 1023 documents in the past, and now the FBI is subject to a legitimate subpoena for that very document. In last week's phone call with Director Wray, I also asked him if the 1023 is part of an ongoing investigation. He answered that it's relevant to an ongoing investigative matter. From that vague answer, it's reasonable to conclude that it's part of an ongoing investigation, otherwise it wouldn't be relative to one. It's also reasonable to conclude that the FBI finds it reliable enough to continue using it several years later. Still, that doesn't preclude Congress from running a parallel investigation pursuant to our constitutional oversight responsibilities. You may remember that this senator did the same thing during Crossfire Hurricane. If anything, this entire process is a lesson for the executive branch with respect to Congress's constitutional power of oversight. Now remember, Congress funds the executive branch, not the other way around. Remember, the document references other details that I believe will be made public in time. We have duties to the whistleblowers who provided legally protected, unclassified disclosure to us. These whistleblowers are patriots and must be protected. Partisan media, most likely in conjunction with the Biden FBI, have misleadingly reported the 1023 is from a tranche of information provided by Rudy Giuliani. News reports last week dispel that notion and make clear that 1023 information that we request is independent of Giuliani. Those news reports also show that the source who formed the basis of the 1023 is a long-serving FBI source. The source reportedly received numerous validations from the FBI. The source reportedly operated even during the Obama administration. Based on what I've been told about yesterday's meeting, the FBI didn't contradict these findings. Today, I can say that based upon unclassified and legally protected whistleblower disclosures, the FBI source in the 1023 has been paid at least $200,000 by the FBI since the source was opened and operational. High dollar payments obviously means the FBI believes the source to be credible and reputable. That makes sense, since Director Wray said the 1023 is relevant to an ongoing investigating report. So, is the FBI looking at bribery allegations against members of the Biden family? Is U.S. Attorney Weiss looking into this? Did the FBI follow normal investigative processes and procedures, or did they just sweep this under the rug? For example, did the FBI try to improperly use the August 2020 Brian Otten assessment to shut down the 1023 reporting by falsely labeling it disinformation. What exactly is the FBI doing with the information in this 1023 document that we request? A vague pronouncement that the 1023 is relevant to an ongoing matter is certainly not even close to enough information to satisfy Congress as well as the American people about what is actually being done with the information on this 1023 document. The Justice Department and the FBI no longer deserve the benefit of doubt. Just read the Durham report, and in example after example of the Justice Department and FBI failures that the Durham report points out. And since July of last year, I've raised one whistleblower allegation after another to Attorney General Garland and to Director Wray of the FBI relating to Biden family investigations. Now, just remember this. The Justice Department and the FBI have failed to dispute a single whistleblower allegation that I've made public. They've also failed to provide any records that I have requested from the FBI or the Department of Justice. Here with this 1023 document that I've been referring to throughout my remarks, the Biden Justice Department and FBI must explain to Congress and the American people what, if anything, they've done with this information. And they need to show their work. We're not accepting their word anymore. We're seeking documentary proof of what they did to investigate the matter or their failure to so do. Given the gravity of the issues at stake, the American people deserve nothing less. So, to the Justice Department and the FBI, quit playing games and recognize who you work for. You're not working to protect the corporate interests of the FBI. You're working for the American people. Last week, I came here to speak to my colleagues about the Biden administration and the FBI playing games with the American people by hiding the FBI-generated 1023 document from Congress and the American people. Director Wray was going to be held in contempt for refusing to produce the 1023 that I told Chairman Comer about, and I think I had that first conversation with Chairman Comer about 3 weeks ago. Then, instead of contempt, the FBI committed to showing the 1023 and related documents to the whole Congress. By the way, I thank Chairman Comer for his cooperation with me and how he's pursued this issue, because we know a heck of a lot more now than if he hadn't been involved in this whole effort. So the FBI showed, after the FBI committed to showing this document, they showed, but it didn't provide possession of the 1023 to the House Oversight Committee last week. And by the way, 1023 is unclassified. So why shouldn't the entire country know about what's in this 1023? As the public knows, that 1023 involves an alleged bribery scheme between then Vice President Biden, Hunter Biden, and a foreign national. The same allegations that Chairman Comer and I made public on May the 3rd of this year. And on the very same day that the FBI provided a redacted version of the 1023 to the House Oversight Committee, the Justice Department then announced that former President Trump had been indicted and charged with 37 crimes related to his alleged mishandling of classified records. Attorney General Garland signed off on prosecuting Trump for conduct similar to what Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton engaged in. Two standards of justice in this country will turn our constitutional republic upside down. Thanks to the political infections within the Biden Justice Department and the FBI, we were well along the road for that to happen. This senator will do all that he can to fight political infection in the Department of Justice and the FBI. And you fight it, then, by bringing transparency to what this government does. The public's business ought to be public. Transparency brings accountability. With respect to the 1023 shown to that House Oversight Committee, from what I've been told by folks who've reviewed it, it's filled with redactions. Now, the document that Comer and I read had maybe 2 or 3 half-inch redactions, not whole sentences redacted, as I'm told the document in the SCIF is. So, Director Wray placed redactions on a document that's already unclassified. As I've said before, unclassified. More than that, the FBI made Congress review a redacted, unclassified document in a classified facility. That goes to show you the disrespect that the FBI has for Congress. On a previous time on this Senate floor, I think I told my fellow senators that what's so unusual about an unclassified document being given to the public when, I think it was May the 18th of this year, there was leaked to the New York Times a classified document and even the name of a confidential human source. So, we're kind of in a strange situation here. Classified document can be leaked to the New York Times, but a non-classified document can't be made public to 300 million Americans if they're interested in reading it. Now, accordingly, Congress still lacks a full and complete picture with respect to what that document really says. That's why it's important that the document be made public without unnecessary redactions for the American people to see. Can you believe redacting an unclassified document? So now, let me assist for the purposes of more transparency on this subject. The 1023 produced to the House committees redacted reference that the foreign national who allegedly bribed Joe and Hunter Biden allegedly has audio recordings of his conversation with them. 17 such recordings. According to the 1023, the foreign national possesses 15 audio recordings of phone calls between him and Hunter Biden. According to the 1023, the foreign national possesses 2 audio recordings of phone calls between him and then Vice President Joe Biden. These recordings were allegedly kept as a sort of insurance policy for the foreign national in case that he got into a tight spot. The 1023 also indicates that then Vice President Joe Biden may have been involved in bereavement employing Hunter Biden. Based on the facts known to the Congress and the public, it's clear that the Justice Department, the FBI, haven't nearly had the same laser focus on the Biden family. Special Counsel Jack Smith has used a recording against former President Trump. Well, what is U.S. Attorney Weiss doing with respect to these alleged Joe and Hunter Biden recordings that are apparently relevant to the high-stakes bribery scheme? Getting a full and complete 1023 is critical for the American people to know and understand the true nature of the document and to hold the Justice Department and the FBI accountable. It's also important for asserting constitutional congressional oversight powers against an out-of-control executive branch, obviously drunk with political infection. Remember, Congress has received 1023s in the past, and they've been made public. So asking for this 1023 to be turned over to the American people to read is not an unusual thing that goes on with 1023s. Congress owes it to the American people and the brave and heroic whistleblowers to continue to fight for transparency in this matter and make this document public without unnecessary redactions. And I want everybody to remember that I have read the unredacted version, except for a couple or three half-inch redactions, I'd say. Thank you very much. I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Okay. Mr. Abate, I'd like to have you describe for me the process and procedure that the FBI should normally follow when receiving criminal allegations from a trusted FBI source that an office holder engaged in bribery. For example, if the allegations include reference to evidence that would prove or disprove the bribery scheme, would standard procedure, operating procedure require the FBI to seek out that evidence?
Senator, in any instance where we receive information, an allegation, or a complaint, we apply the standards on the Attorney General guidelines and our DIOG and determine whether the information received, the allegation, the complaint meets the threshold for the opening of an investigation. We consult appropriately with our field office, with our program management elements at headquarters, with our Office of General Counsel, and then we take it from there based on the information, whether it meets the standard.
So that's the investigation process that should have been followed with respect to the 1023. Apparently that process wasn't followed. For the sake of restoring credibility, the FBI must explain itself sooner rather than later. Mr. Olson, this is my seconds as co-chair with Senator Wyden of the Whistleblower Caucus to think in terms of a lot of people maybe putting their jobs in jeopardy by being whistleblowers on this issue, and I'd like to take 90 seconds to back that up. And it, of course, involves the 1023, and since I've given floor speeches or two on this subject, I won't have to go into detail on that, but we do have a document that the FBI refused to even acknowledge existed until I told Director Wray that I had reviewed about a month ago an unredacted version of this document. The document, obviously, as you know, discusses Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. It references recordings in both. The references millions of dollars to them from foreign nationals. And ask yourself this question if you want to be intellectually honest. The FBI refused the uncorroborated Steele dossier as a basis of investigating Trump and get and to get vices during the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. What, if anything, has the Justice Department and the FBI done to investigate this 1023 and the people connected with it? The Justice Department and the FBI must show their work. They no longer deserve the benefit of the doubt. Getting a full and complete 1023 is critical for the American people to know and understand the true nature of the document and to hold the Justice Department and the FBI accountable. So I want everyone to know that I'm going to send a letter, separate from the one that my colleague Graham talked about, send a letter to the Justice Department, the FBI, that demands that they protect these brave and heroic whistleblowers who have come forward to me. I encourage all members, Republican and Democrat, to join in that effort. Protecting whistleblowers is a bipartisan issue. Today, I'd like to address the unclassified FBI-generated 1023 form that I made public last week. This is a 1023 that Director Wray refused to admit existed until I and Chairman Comer told him that we had read the document. The FBI provided a highly redacted version to the House Committee on Oversight and in the process ignored the Senate access to that document. That version redacted references to the alleged audio recordings between then Vice President Biden, Hunter Biden, and the foreign national. It also redacted references to text messages and financial records that allegedly existed to prove the criminal act was done. Those redactions are an obstructive conduct by the United States. Why? Because this was an unclassified document. It's not even marked law enforcement sensitive. And by the way, the Justice Department and FBI leaks exposed sources well before the 1023 became public. Now there's been allegations in the media that this 1023 consists of unverified information. That didn't stop the media's breathless reporting for years about the unverified and very famous Steele dossier. But the Justice Department and the FBI have not told us what they did to investigate the 1023 document. So then, since the FBI hasn't told us anything about their investigation of 1023, if they did any, so how does the media then know that it is unverified? From what I've seen, much of the media's reporting has missed the essential question. That essential question is this: did the Justice Department and the FBI follow normal investigative process and procedures to run the information down, or did they sweep this information under the rug? Now, we've had several media outlets interviewing law enforcement sources with knowledge of the 1023 who start to answer that very question. So, I'm going to refer to some of these reports from the media. One law enforcement source reported that, quote, This was a confidential human source that had a long relationship with the FBI, had given information that was used in multiple other investigations unrelated to Burisma or the Bidens, end of quote. That law enforcement source said there was, quote, fight for a month, end of quote, to get the FBI handlers to re-interview the FBI source. That re-interview was necessary because a separate 1023 mentioned Hunter Biden. And that re-interview ultimately produced the 1023 that I made public last week. When seeing that, my first question was, why the fight to interview the FBI source? That's the fight that supposedly took a month that I previously referred to. Then the law enforcement source said, quote, we got that report back and we're like, holy smokes, this is something, end of quote. The news reports also show that the Justice Department and FBI personnel were able to validate some claims in the 1023 report without compulsory process. For example, a news report quotes a law enforcement source, quote, there were multiple meetings alleged overseas. Some of the confidential human source claims were corroborated against the confidential human source travel records and contemporary knowledge from the handler about him attending meetings with Lochevsky and other people present, end of quote. The news report also notes that public records also validate some of the 1020 claims about Lochevsky efforts to buy into the American energy market. A separate news report based on law enforcement source with knowledge says that Weiss's team was briefed on the validations, which then begs the question, what did the investigators do to investigate? Well, it's been reported that a law enforcement source believed U.S. Attorney Weiss was reluctant to pursue leads because of political sensitivities. More precisely, was Weiss' team concerned about investigating because it would involve then presidential candidate Biden? Well, that didn't stop the Justice Department when Trump was a candidate the first or second time. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a July 25th, 2022 letter that I wrote to the Justice Department and the FBI. That letter talked about the FBI shutting down verified and verifiable investigative avenues into Hunter Biden separate from the ongoing U.S. Attorney Weiss's investigation and the 1023. So it's clear that even if information is verified, the FBI has shut it down in the past if it relates to the Biden family. Now, former Attorney General Bill Barr has said that the 1023 was credible enough to be passed on to Delaware for, quote, further investigation, end of quote. He's also said that a review was done to ensure the 1023 wasn't disinformation before passing it on. Director Wray likewise informed me and Chairman Comer of its credibility, noting that it's relevant to an ongoing investigative matter. This all took place in the phone call that Comer and I had with Wray. So Wray also didn't say that it's part of Giuliani's information, and he didn't tell me and Comer that it's the product of any disinformation. Accordingly, I want to make clear what my oversight focus is and will be: holding the Justice Department and the FBI accountable to explain to the American people what they did to investigate and what they found. To do that, congressional oversight must focus on the Justice Department and the FBI's investigative process and whether the U.S. Attorney Weiss's scope includes bribery. Congress and the public must get answers to these questions. What did the Justice Department and the FBI do to investigate the information contained in 1023? Did the Justice Department and the FBI follow normal investigative process and procedures, or try to sweep it all under the rug because of political bias? More precisely, did the FBI and DOJ seek to obtain the evidence referenced in the document? Did the DOJ and FBI seek to interview individuals relating to the 1023? If not, why not? If so, one way or the other, what did they find? Here we're in July 2023, and we're talking about a June 2020 document. The FBI can easily answer those questions. The fact that they haven't indicates to me that the Justice Department and FBI have not followed normal investigative protocol. Congress must also find out the true extent to which the August 2020 assessment created by Brian Oten was used to shut down the Biden family investigative leads. For example, we know that the FBI had at one time over a dozen sources who provided potentially criminal information relating to Hunter Biden. Did the August 2020 assessment shut any of them down? In conclusion, as we prepare to celebrate National Whistleblowers Day, let's not forget the only reason why Congress has been able to make this information public is because of brave and very patriotic whistleblowers who have approached my office. Remember this: to date, the Justice Department and the FBI have not disputed any of their allegations. Further, remember this, that includes information relating to this 1023 that I've made public. And some of this information goes back to October of last year. During that period of time, the Department of Justice, the FBI, haven't disputed any of that information. And a perfect chance for Christopher Wray, director of the FBI, to do that would have been with that telephone conversation that he had with Chairman Comer and me. And so, giving you all this information, that ought to tell you something about what the FBI is up to, what the DOJ is up to, and the information I've given you today ought to tell you that there's plenty out there in the media, and the media should not be questioning whether or not this information in 1023 has any validity. I yield the floor.
Chairman. I know we all have other things to do. So let me just give you my thoughts about the information discovered by Senator Grassley. I have known President Biden probably for 25 years. I like him. I respect him. I disagree with him more times than not. But if you ask me, is Joe Biden the type guy that would take a $5 million bribe? My answer is, based on my experience, no. But we have a situation here where in June of 2020, I believe it was, the FBI recorded information about a confidential informant that was on the payroll, suggesting there was an interaction between Hunter Biden and Vice President Biden during his vice presidency with officials in Ukraine, maybe Burisma officials, that they're tapes. And I can't walk down the hall without somebody asking me. I don't know. Here's what I do know. The Steele dossier was told to us to be true, and it was a lie. Hunter Biden laptop, we were told, was a fake. It seems to be accurate. I don't know what to tell you, but I do know this. We have an obligation to answer these questions. This is not a Fox News story. This comes from the FBI itself. Now, whether or not this is gossip and hearsay and a bunch of junk like the Steele dossier was, I don't know. I don't know who the source was. I don't know what they heard. I don't know what the people are claiming to have. But I do know this. It's not a laughing matter on our side. The trust of the intelligence community and the investigative agencies in this country regarding political matters is almost zero on our side. So here's what I would hope we could do. I'll turn it over to Senator Grassley in a second. Let's find out what the hell happened. Mr. Raskin, Congressman Raskin, suggests that the Attorney General Barr closed this out. That's not true. That's just not true. He's selling things that are not true. This was apparently handed over to Mr. Brady, U.S. Attorney, who was supposed to look at it and see whether or not it was disinformation by Russia, and apparently concluded it was not. Then it was given to Mr. Weiss, the U.S. Attorney, looking at all this stuff. And I guess here's what I'm saying. If it was dismissed as not being credible, I think the public needs to know what led to that. If it's part of an ongoing investigation, we need to back off because we can't interfere in an investigation. But if there's no there in the view of the intelligence community, the FBI, I want to know how they concluded that. What did they do? And if it is being looked at seriously, then we'll let the system work. So there'll be a letter coming, I think, from most everybody on our side. The answer given to Senator Cruz yesterday will not stand. It will not stand. Senator Grassley.
Could I have just 90 seconds as
Sure.
co-chair with Senator Wyden of the Whistleblower Caucus to think in terms of a lot of people maybe putting their jobs in jeopardy by being whistleblowers on this issue, and I'd like to take 90 seconds to back that up. And it, of course, involves the 1023, and since I've given floor speeches or two on this subject, I won't have to go into detail on that, but we do have a document that the FBI refused to even acknowledge existed until I told Director Wray that I had reviewed about a month ago an unredacted version of this document. The document, obviously, as you know, discusses Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. It references recordings in both. The references millions of dollars to them from foreign nationals. And ask yourself this question if you want to be intellectually honest. The FBI refused the uncorroborated Steele dossier as a basis of investigating Trump and get FISA during the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. What, if anything, has the Justice Department and the FBI done to investigate this 1023 and the people connected with it. The Justice Department, the FBI must show their work. They no longer deserve the benefit of the doubt. Getting a full and complete 1023 is critical for the American people to know and understand the true nature of the document and to hold the Justice Department, the FBI, accountable. So I want everyone to know that I'm going to send a letter, separate from the one that my colleague Graham talked about, send a letter to the Justice Department, the FBI, that demands that they protect these brave and heroic whistleblowers who have come forward to me. I encourage all members, Republican and Democrat, to join in that effort. Protecting whistleblowers is a bipartisan issue.
Senator Grassley, you have been consistent as long as I've known you on that issue, and I respect you very much for it. But I do want to say a word about this so-called FD 1023 form, which I'd never heard of until this controversy came before us. These are forms used by FBI special agents to record raw, unverified reporting from confidential human sources. The form only documents information received and not yet verified. It does not establish the veracity or credibility of the information or reflect the conclusions of the FBI after an investigation. Not only is the information in this type of form unverified, in this instance, this particular confidential human source did not provide firsthand information either. The source was relaying secondhand information the source had heard from a Burisma executive. Based solely on this form, which the FBI has produced for the House Oversight Committee, House Republicans have continued their long-running efforts to raise questions about President Biden based on his son's business dealings, claiming that Hunter Biden's prior business dealings involved the Ukraine have influenced Joe Biden either as vice president or president. There is no evidence whatsoever that either of these claims are true. However, as President Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr made clear, in addition to the FBI, U.S. Attorney Scott Brady and his office vetted his information and then briefed other relevant U.S. attorneys' offices with open investigations. So here's a suggestion. Why don't we take someone who was a U.S. attorney chosen by the Trump administration and give that U.S. attorney the authority to look into this? Not a Biden appointee, but a Trump appointee. Turns out that's exactly what we've done. To the extent any information included in FD 1023 can be verified, Trump appointed U.S. Attorney David Weiss, who has been investigating Hunter Biden's finances since 2019, and was briefed by U.S. Attorney Scott Brady, has the information, and it informs his investigations. The Biden administration has taken a hands-off approach to the work of this U.S. attorney and said he is open to do whatever he believes proper and necessary in this investigation. Questions can be raised about this form. I think we have to understand the origin of the allegations that have been made, how they've gone through at least review by the Barr, Bill Barr, the Attorney General under President Trump, as well as this U.S. Attorney Scott Brady, who I don't know personally. But the fact of the matter is, if there's anything to this, we have a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney who for 4 years has been investigating this, and there have been no efforts by the Biden administration to hold him back from his investigation. I think that is the appropriate way to approach this.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, one, if we've learned anything from the Steele dossier, we should be skeptical of what people say. And we should look at it and not run to the court and tell people it's true when any effort to look at it, you'd find it was false. The problem you have on our side is that there were every indication that it was a bunch of BS, and every time somebody raised that possibility, they went back to court. So none of us believe, quite frankly, that false information or shady information can't be used against our people, because it was. Now, I'm glad to hear your concerns about this source. I don't know either. Listen, I have no idea who the Burisma executive is, where they should be believed at all, or their tapes. If there are tapes, well, then that would go contrary to what President Biden said he did or didn't do as vice president. All I'm asking is, it went to Mr. Brady. We don't know what happened to it. If it's being investigated by Mr. Weiss, that'll be it for me. I'll back off and let him do his job. But here's the central question. If it's not being investigated by Mr. Weiss, it was determined to be a bunch of crap, I want to know who made that decision and what they did. And that's not unreasonable. And Attorney General Barr has told the public this thing was not closed out as claimed by Democratic members of the House. So it's not that complicated. Simple question. What happened to the allegation? If it's part of an ongoing investigation, I'll back off. If it's been disposed of as not being accurate, I want to know how and why, and we can all make our decisions whether or not that was fair. That's not an unfair thing to ask, and I'm hoping together we can get those questions answered.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Grassley.
I can't take very long on this because of the fact that we need to know a couple things. I can't make any judgments about what any hunter has done. My oversight is of the FBI. I think what we need to know is what did the FBI do to follow up on this information that's in 1023. And then in regard to U.S. Attorney Weiss, we don't, do we know if his job follows up on bribery, or is it just this tax stuff that we've been reading about? If it doesn't include bribery, then he can't do anything about investigating it.
Senator, what I have been told is this is an FBI form which was then shared with the Attorney General to the point where he reported that in addition to U.S. Attorney Scott Brady, they've vetted and briefed other relevant U.S. Attorney offices with open investigations about the same form. That does not seem like concealment. This all occurred during the Trump administration. And now we have David Weiss, who has the authority to investigate Hunter Biden's finances without restriction, as I understand it. No one's holding him back from any investigation. So, from my point of view, I think the Biden family and the vice president or president have shown good faith in this effort by empowering David Weiss to continue this investigation.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, it's a simple question. If it was found not to be believable or accurate, I want to know who made that decision and how they came to that conclusion. That's all I'm asking. If it was sent over to Mr. Weiss as part of a broader investigation and he's looking at this, I'll back off and let him do his job. It's not that complicated. Nobody over here believes in the system much anymore, and let's find out what happened to the allegation. Again, Senator Grassley and his team found this. And you're right, it happened in June of 2020 when the Trump administration, they were involved. So I understand your point. It's not a bad point. I mean, the Attorney General Barr apparently knew about this, sent it to Mr. Brady, and Mr. Brady was supposed to dispose of it one way or the other. Did he say after looking at it, I found it to be not credible, or did he send it to Mr. Wise to look at further? I think all of us just want to know what happened. And if it's a part of an ongoing investigation, back off.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kennedy.
I know Senator Graham didn't mean this, but I believe in the system. But the American people right now are skeptical about the system. And I happen to believe that the FBI is the premier law enforcement agency in all of human history. And most of the people there just get up every day and do their job in a bipartisan manner, a nonpartisan manner. But what Senator Graham and Senator Grassley are asking in light of history, in light of the context, is not unreasonable. There's no question that for at least a period of time, there were people in charge of the FBI who acted on their political beliefs. And I'm not talking about former Director Hoover. I'm talking about Mr. Wray's predecessor. The director of the FBI at that time decided that he was going to investigate not one, but both presidential candidates. With respect to one, he decided to proceed, with respect to one of those candidates, he decided to proceed on the basis of information that we now know was manufactured by that candidate's opponent, which we call opposition research. In terms of the second presidential candidate, Secretary Clinton, she was investigated. A reasonable person can debate whether or not she should have been, but the FBI director at that time called not one, but two press conferences to talk about the investigation. And after he concluded it, he then opened it back up. And then he called a second press conference. It might have cost Secretary Clinton the election. Now, the American people have seen all this. And in many cases in government and democracy, it's not the substance, it's the perception. And I don't know in this instance, now that the question has been raised, why FBI Director Wray and our Attorney General can't answer Senator Graham's and Senator Grassley's question and put this to rest.
Senator, I'm just thinking about the timeline. This form, FD 1023, one specific one we're talking about here, came up during the Trump administration. The FBI received this information during the Trump administration. And for whatever it was worth, it was communicated to President Trump's Attorney General, Bill Barr, as well as the FBI. They were in on the conversation as well. Think about the timeline of when it occurred. What was happening in America during that timeline? We were just about to vote on the re-election of President Trump and whether the American people would have him for another term. And now his Attorney General has this information, which some have alleged shows a $5 million bribe to the President of the United States, Joe Biden. Attorney General Barr has this information before the election, and we didn't hear about it. What does that tell you? Was it a cover-up by Barr? For what purpose? This has now become a sinister conspiracy, but I think the timeline argues that it isn't, that there was disclosure and obviously lack of credibility in this FD 1023. Meanwhile, David Weiss is still hot on the case years ago in Delaware as the U.S. Attorney of Hunter Biden. He supposedly, from what I'm told here, was given the same information. Nothing happened. Maybe that means it's not credible. Maybe that means that these reasonable Republican leaders under President Trump decided it was not credible to pursue it. But now it's back again, coincidentally with a week when the former president's appearing before a judge in Florida. It just happens to surface again. I think I'd like to have the question answered that Senator Graham asked, but I think the circumstances suggest that if there was a smoking gun here, some members of the Trump administration would have brought it forward long before now.
Mr. Chairman, there's a lot of wisdom in your words. But once again, you have to consider this in context. You correctly described a 1023. When Senator Grassley first raised this issue, after the whistleblower came to him. The FBI wouldn't even acknowledge there was a 1023. Then the story changed. There was a 1023, but you can't see it.
Yeah.
Then the story changed. Okay, you can see the 1023, but we're going to heavily redact it. I suppose they didn't know Senator Grassley had seen the original document, but he knew what they redacted, which were the allegations about the tapes. Consider the context. I'm not going to go back through what I just said, but the American people are looking at all of this, and they just want an answer. I agree with you. We don't need a conspiracy. Let's end the conspiracy. But for the life of me, I can't understand why our Attorney General and our FBI Director can't come in front of the Judiciary Committee, in front of God and country, and answer Chuck and Lindsay's question. And if they say, we're investigating this, then we back off. If they say there was nothing to it, perhaps we should ask, okay, can you explain why? What's unreasonable about that, given our history over the past 5 years?
Senator, if I might say.
Sure.
This may be a headline in the Daily Conehead, but I have good
Sorry,
news.
I didn't hear you.
This may be a headline for the Daily Conehead.
Yeah, you like that, Daily Conehead?
I like that very much. This year, as in every year that I've chaired the committee, we will have an oversight hearing in the fall with the FBI. And we will have an oversight hearing with the appropriate agencies that we're responsible to oversee. So you said bring the FBI in, we're going to.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, it's not quite that simple. We have a former president being tried in Florida. We all can have our views about whether or not that's correct or not, but it is going forward. How did this happen? Some whistleblower told Senator Grassley about this document to the point that they felt compelled to tell him the system is not up and up here. Now, Mr. Alton, who is in charge of investigating the Hunter Biden crowd, was also part of the Steele dossier team. So, yes, it did happen when Attorney General Barr was in office. That is a very good point. Attorney General Barr says he gave it to Brady and it was not deemed to be inaccurate. He didn't close the file. People in the House are saying he did. All I want to know is, what did Mr. Brady do with it? Did he make a decision it was not credible? And we don't even need to do this in public. I just like to hear privately, the committee as a whole, how this was disposed of, so I can go back to South Carolina and tell people with some degree of confidence this matter was looked at, disposed of in a way that made sense to me. And if I can't answer that question, none of us over here can answer that question. We need to be able to answer that question. And quite frankly, if you accuse me of making phone calls to some company, gas company in Ukraine, and I didn't do it, I'd want to tell you I didn't do it, not laugh about it. So I don't know if there are any tapes or not. It could be all made up. It could be. I'm the first to say that. But we're going to find out why they think it was all made up.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lee, I've been advised by the staff we've lost our quorum at this point, and I would give Senator Graham the last word, and I think I have to stand adjourned at this point. No, I don't think we can go any further with it.
Well, we will be back.
So will I. Meeting stands adjourned.
When you came to my office, I wouldn't ask you any gotcha questions unless I was going to do that, so I hope these are legitimate approach to things. The Social Security Administration was reestablished as an independent agency under President Clinton. 1994, Senator Moynihan argued making the system an independent agency would help, quote, insulate the program from partisan politics. I've got 3 questions, but just consider them as one question. Should you be confirmed as commissioner, will you commit to keeping the SSA insulated from politics and not taking positions on political issues or initiatives? And I ask this question because your predecessor was fired for politics. So what does independent mean to you vis-a-vis your relationship with President Biden?
Senator, and I've read actually the statute that made it an independent agency. I think there's been some creative tension between Social Security being an independent agency operating above politics, if you will, or without regard to the politics, and what the Supreme Court has said is the prerogative of any elected executive to have and appoint their own cabinet members. For my part, as I look at this duty, I believe first and foremost I have a responsibility to advocate for the agency, to advocate for the long-term health and well-being of that agency, and secondly, to make sure that each member of this committee, indeed any member of Congress, is provided with reliable data and accurate evidence so that you can make the policy while, in the words of the minority leader, I make the trains run on time.
Can I concentrate just a little bit on that last point, your relationship with the president being an independent agency, as Senator Moynihan indicated?
And Senator, that point being that, I'm certainly here because President Biden nominated me. I have known him for many years, worked with him and some of you on the Recovery and Reinvestment Act.
Well, then, in light of the fact that your predecessor was fired for politics.
Yeah, Senator, I never had met that gentleman, and I wasn't involved in the administration at that time. I received a call earlier in this year, and the White House asking me if I would be willing to take on this big challenge, and I said yes. I think others might be able to unpack more of the constitutional law and the Supreme Court rulings on those things, but I think that the head of Social Security has to realize that she or he is heading an entity that Congress intends to be independent, even if the Supreme Court says the president has his prerogatives in choosing cabinet members.
Okay. Every year, the Social Security Board of Trustees urges lawmakers to act sooner rather than later to shore up the trust fund. As commissioner, would you see as your role in addressing Social Security long-term solvency, or would that be no role whatsoever, since it's up to Congress to make the decision?
Yeah, Senator, thank you. There's an urgent crisis that we face now of customer service, but there's one over the horizon with regard to solvency. This is how I would see my role in that, and that would be to be an effective administrator, executing the will of the President of the United States and Congress, improving services to people. But one aspect of this job is making sure that you get the best numbers that you can possibly get on the policy options before you in that solvency debate. In other words, Senator Cassidy and I had some time to talk, and he used the analogy of dials. He said we need to have an evidence-based conversation about what the value of each of those dials is as we look to restore solvency. So policy, Senator, is your prerogative. I would not step on that prerogative. I will defend the agency, and most importantly, I'll make sure you get the evidence and the numbers you need to evaluate what's best for the people over the long haul.
This will be my last question. One item that's sorely in need of updating is the official jobs listing that the Social Security Administration uses to determine if there's a job in the national economy that a disability applicant is able to perform. The official job listing hasn't been updated since 1977 and includes jobs that are obsolete in today's economy while omitting positions that have arisen due to advances in technology. Before I ask my question, outside the fact that this is 47 years since it's been updated, I don't know how government could be that unreliable in keeping things updated. But as commissioner, where would updating the official job listing stand in your list of priorities?
It would be a high priority, Senator. I've read some of those stories too, people being told that they can go get a job as a SEAL killer someplace, or those other outrageous examples. If you talk to somebody like, I don't know, some of these search firms that recruit people for jobs, I'm quite sure they have a much more extensive and up-to-date list than the federal government has. And I would look forward to working with you on that. It would be a high priority.
The time of the gentleman is expired. Senator Cornyn's next.
Thank you, Governor, for being willing to